Good evening, everybody, and welcome to October's Seriously Entertaining. I'm Amanda Foreman, and this
is Lucas Whitman. Thrilled to have you all here tonight. We've got an amazing show for you, but before we get to the show, a little bit of housekeeping.
Oh, yes. Okay, so tonight's theme is serious entertaining is what goes around, which is actually very apt for seriously entertaining because it is the writers' program of House of SpeakEasy, and we were formed 10 years ago to defend and promote the power of the written word. And it turns out that we are actually the only organization in this country that does it in a holistic way. We do that by supporting the people who write the words, the producers, the people who consume the words, the readers, and the future pipeline of young writers and readers in America. And seriously entertaining is that platform that we provide to writers, the writers who will come and we're going to listen to tonight, who can discuss and talk about their ideas on stage. And then, because we know that writers need more than just exposure, we sell their books, we grow their audiences, and we split the box office with them. Yes. Thank you, because showing respect to writers is more than just exposing them to whatever, because that's just another word for exploitation. Never mind. But of course, once we've done that, what do we do next? We have the book truck, and the book truck is where we take books to underserved communities, because we know, studies show, that actually book ownership, the ability to build a home library, has a special alchemy all of its own. It makes fostering communities all the much easier. It brings the power of ideas and the power of the written word, not just to adults and literacy, but to children. And it gives them that confidence to believe that they can own those words. And then when we're in schools, seriously entertaining, what you see here, we have a targeted program that takes YA authors into communities which they represent or which they are similar to, and they give a kind of student version of this, and then afterwards they workshop with them. And what it does is it tells these kids that they can own their words, they can express them, they can write them, and they have the ideas to spread them around. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why we're all here tonight. Woo! Want to add anything, or shall I just go in? So, all right, so without further ado, I shall introduce to you tonight's first speaker. And she is, as Lucas knows, totally fantastic. This is Fancy Feast, who is a Brooklyn... I know, fans in the audience. So, she's a Brooklyn-based burlesque performer, writer, and sex educator who holds the title of Miss Coney Island 2016. And she is the recipient of the Revolutionary Award at the 2017 New York Burlesque Festival. And she has performed at such venues as the Whitney, the Metropolitan Opera, Meow Wolf in Santa Fe, and now the august and one and only stage at Joe's Pub. But this is burlesque in her own words. And Lucas, I'm going to let you read that.
I grew up idealizing sluts, ne'er-do-wells, and wayward artists. Coming of age as a relatively good Jewish girl in the suburbs meant my closest access to that kind of punk rock lifestyle was through books and magazines, doing cultural reporting on the underground. My own writing style developed out of a gooey, syncretic blend of gonzo journalism, riot girl zines, DC's slam poetry scene, and the mid-2000s live journal and Tumblr digital confessional. Please welcome Fancy Feast to the stage.
Hi, everyone. So the theme was what goes around, so I thought I would tell you about walk-around gigs. Has anybody heard of walk-around before? All right. So if any of you have been to the Renaissance Fair, and you've seen, there's people with jugglers and people with the funnel cakes, like they all have a job, and then every now and then you see a peasant who's just kind of like, that's walk-around. So burlesque performers are hired to do ambient sort of atmosphere performance. We get paid to walk around at rich people's parties. Seriously. So if you're like doing a Great Gatsby kind of thing, you're going to need some Charleston girls. Or, if you're doing a Versailles thing, you're going to need girls blushing behind their fans. That's where we come in. We don't shop on Amazon, you know what I mean? We bring the good costuming. So one day I got a call from a producer for a walk-around gig, and she said, so yeah, the theme for the evening is the 7 deadly sins. And we were hoping that you would portray, and I could tell that she was uncomfortable, but I held the silence. I really wanted her to say it. Gluttony. No offense. It's nothing personal. It's a very cool thing to say. And I asked how much the gig paid. And then I said yes. Because the week before, I had been speaking to my mentor, Rose Wood, a shock artist whose tagline is the mother of all motherfuckers. And when I told her, I was like, there's whatever, like, walk around, like, sometimes it's a little degrading or whatever. She was like, how great to be degraded, how wonderful. And she said something to me that really changed my life. She's like, not everybody gets to be a pretty princess. Some people really need their monsters. And so in that moment, that was my opportunity, right, to be a monster, to portray gluttony. So I said yes, headed to the gig. It was very like, if you've ever been to the sort of Pandora area of Disney, sort of like greenery and lighting and bioluminescence, and everything was very expensive looking. And for the first half of the evening, the producer had me set up on the bar as people were filtering in. And I got a silver platter with stacks and stacks of grapes, and it was my job to feed people as they were waiting for their craft cocktails. And that was great. That was like easy. People started coming in. Everybody was like very rich, very expensive, well-heeled in a way that sort of replaces humanity or joy, like just a sort of a nice rich and miserable kind of crowd. And I got to play with them. I was like, hi, while you're waiting for your gimlet, do you want a little fruit snack? That kind of shit. And I was wearing a gold fringe skirt, and when I say skirt, I mean it was just fringe. There was no fabric. And pasties, and in my hair, I had a bunch of rhinestone fruit. So there was very like Dionysian kind of excess. And people were eating the grapes, which was fantastic. And some people were like, "Oh, hey, can I take a picture of you for Snapchat?" And we were playing. A guy handed me his vape, and I was like taking these big vape puffs, while he was like, "Hey, tell me, what's it like to be hot for a living?" And I blew a giant puff of smoke or vapor, I guess, in his face. And I was like, it's boring. Why don't you buy me a drink? I don't drink. I was like, I don't know, give him something to do. He needs a job. But I felt so powerful as this goddess up on the bar. And my grapes were disappearing. And I was like, I'm good. They're eating the grapes. This is great. And then the producer grabbed me for the second half of the evening. So we did a switchover. First half of the party, this sort of lush, like garden kind of situation. And the second half was more like the outcome of sin. And at that point, I don't know if you've been to a rich people party. no matter how they start, and like no matter what the vibe is at the beginning, like it could be like finger sandwiches, and at the end it's like Fall of Rome orgy kind of thing. The party had really started to take that turn, and I was like, oh, I'm just noticing that there's like 3 or 4 people going into the bathroom but with each other, and they're not closing the door, and I don't know what they're doing. And then I was like, oh, that man is just really smelling his iPhone. I wonder what that's about. And I was like, cocaine, it's cocaine. That's what he's snorting cocaine. And so things are starting to devolve, and that's right the time where the producer decides that it's the second half, like we're turning over. So the performers are no longer playing quite as nice. And our lookbook, our style guide for the second half of the evening was Hieronymus Bosch's painting The Garden of Earthly Delights. Don't know if you've seen that one, but it's a little light on the wardrobe. It's mostly just like nude sinners being, poked with pitchforks by like half man, half bird. I was like, I don't really understand. Like, I don't have pants that go with this, So my costume was I didn't bring a costume. I was like naked, like, this is the costume I come with. And I rethought that at the last minute because I was like, that feels a little too naked for me, even for me. So I borrowed some rope from a friend and I tied a body harness, and I was like, chic, accessory, black, New York. And my producer came back to visit me and to hand me my prop for the second half of the evening. And it was this massive, shuddering, glossy Boston cream cake. And my job was to walk around at the party and to see if I could feed people. So I stepped out from the backstage, and I suddenly realized, I recognized this moment from my adolescent nightmares. I was like, I am the only naked person at this party. And on the floor, I am 5'1". I'm barefoot. There's something sticky on me. I don't know what it is. I'm not asking questions. And I'm like, I was at bird's eye view, goddess, whatever, and I'm at cockroach view now. I can see everything. I can smell everyone. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want my pussy to make a snail trail on somebody's Paul Smith suit. Whatever, I'm juicy. It's okay. And I'm kind of panicking because I'm realizing that people are not making eye contact with me. I was able to get rid of grapes like hotcakes, but now with a cake, suddenly I was being treated differently. And to give you a sense of the performances, so there was somebody who was walking around and covering people with like little drips of lighter fluid and having them go up in flames with a little torch. And there was somebody dressed in a pig mask, admiring herself in the mirror. My friend Zoe was walking around with her snake Fantasia, who has an inner ear thing, so always lists to one side, sweet Fantasia. And then there's me, and I was like, oh, can I interest you in some cake? Oh, some dirty cake. And these cokeheads who are fingering each other, who are probably committing tax evasion at the party, are like, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm on keto. It's like, we're really trying not to do gluten this season, It's just like, oh yeah, I'm drinking my calories tonight. Whatever the thing is, I cannot get anybody to eat this goddamn cake, and it's killing me. I'm doing a bad job, which is just, it's just compounding the shame. I'm like, really? In a sin-themed party, this is where you all are drawing the line? Okay, fine, fuck it. So I give up with my tactic. It's not working. And I go upstairs to the main hall where I find a black leather chaise, and I sit down on it. And very deliberately, my finger makes a parabola and penetrates the cake. And I pull my fingers out, all frosting and crumbs, and I bring it to my lips, and I start to eat. And Gluttony decides that this is the most wonderful thing she's ever eaten. And so I'm exaggerating it. I'm playing with my hair. I'm rubbing my hands down my thighs. I've never eaten anything so deliciously sinful. And I see the little lantern light of people's eye contact as they start to turn and watch me. And so I'm staring back at them as I eat, like unafraid to look away, holding their gaze. And before I know it, there is a line forming. And there is a man who had been standing, who is now on his knees crawling toward me. And he asks, "Can I feed you?" And I say, "You may." And so he dips his fingers into the cake and puts them into my mouth. And I hold his wrist and suck on his fingers, clean them, and I say, "Thank you." Behind him, there's another man who, is sort of following the etiquette of the moment, is also on his knees crawling toward me. And he swipes some cake on my clavicle and starts to lick it off, and I'm moaning. But in my head, I'm like, I really hope my body glitter is non-toxic, because he's eating so much of it. And I'm wrestling between this moment that feels so present and visceral, because people are eating through me. These people who have decided that the dirtiest, nastiest thing they could ever do is let this cake pass their lips, but they're getting turned on watching me eat. And so it's a transubstantiation. I can't tell if they want to feed me or be me, if they want to fuck me, what it is that they want to stuff my mouth with. It is this extremely heady experience. And then there's me in all of this being like, oh, this is weird. Trying to hold the moment, trying to give these people this transformation, trying to consecrate their sin, to let them know that this thing that is so dirty that they have not allowed themselves. I mean, it's a rich people party. You don't see fat people at rich people parties. You know what I mean? I was like, I will do this. I will put this into my body for you so that you know it's okay. And then I was like, I've eaten a lot of cake. I'm getting a little overwhelmed. And I see my producer, and I'm like, oh, it's my time? Oh, I'm done? Excuse me. And I stand to go to head back to the backstage. And people are like, no, wait. Stop. We want to feed you. Come back. We haven't gotten a chance. We want to feed you cake. Stressed out, run to the backstage. And I transform back into my street clothes. I have done my job. My check is going to clear. And I had this moment of deep pity for these people who had to pay for the party that I got paid to go to, who wouldn't permit themselves the thing that I was easily allowed to put into myself. So I realized that, as wonderful, as fun as it is to become a monster, sometimes it's truly a gift to feed one. Thank you.
Come on, let's hear it one more time for Fancy Feast. Woo! All right, so our next speaker is a non-binary author based in New York, and their writing has appeared all over the shop: New York Times, The Atlantic, The Cut, Esquire, The Guardian, GQ, Harper's Bazaar, and many, many other publications. And their first novel, The Atmospherians, was actually named one of the editor's choice by the New York Times, and it was Book of the Year by Esquire, Electric, Blurb, Day Beautiful, and many, many, many other outlets. But what is so fascinating and so exciting about Isle McElroy is that they are fearless about talking about anything. And this is what they say in their own words. A lot of my work reflects on my gender identity, my past relationships, and childhood stories. But these aren't nursery stories. They're not fairy stories. They are the stories that make you, well, I'll leave that to Isle to tell you. Isle.
All right, that's a lot of light. Oof. Oh. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Thank you, House of SpeakEasy, for having me. Okay, I'm gonna tell a story. So when I was about like 12 years old, my mom got married. It was her third husband. She loved to get married. And this guy was like the right dude. You know, my dad, he wasn't the right dude. Second husband, not the guy. And then there was George. He came along. He was funny. He was smart. They vibed. It seemed great. And I thought he ruled, you know? Like, the first time I met him, or the first time I saw his apartment when I was like 10 years old, I remember me, him, and my mom were going out to dinner, and we had to like stop by his spot. And I used his bathroom, and he had this like crisp, clean Duke Blue Devils towel that I was like obsessed with, right? Like I was a huge fan of Duke at the time. And I was like, George, where did you get this? And George is like, oh, like I had a soccer scholarship there, but I like busted my knee, so they gave me this towel as a consolation. Like really cool guy. One time he was in Texas riding a motorcycle. He like spun off of his bike, and in the middle of the road, an armadillo came up to him and like snarled in his face and just like ran away. Like the strangest things were happening to him all the time. After college, after his non-Duke University soccer scholarship days, he was recruited to the CIA. And one time, while doing a mission, as he told me about, he was in this car and he drove down a side street. And he realized once he was on the side street that it was completely empty except for this other car. And you know what happens next. The car blew up, causing him to launch backwards multiple times, at which point the car landed upside down, and he sort of, in the very like action hero-y, unbuckled himself as his ears were bleeding. And like just lots of like amazing stories. He lived a lot of life before he met my mom. So George moves into the house where I grew up to live with me and my mom when I was about 12. But then things start getting like a little bit weird, right? Like, I remember when I was about like 14, George, no longer in the CIA, has a job at a high school where he is like the tech guy, right? He fixes the computers. Whenever like planet Earth won't load, he comes in to fix it. So he has this job, and then he comes home one day, and he's talking to my mom and I, and he's like, we've been getting the weirdest emails. Like, every day, there have been these emails sent to the superintendent about the new vice principal that are just, like, going off about how this woman is, like, a terrible vice principal, how she's been mean to the students, how she's been mean to her colleagues. And it's just, like, so just unhinged. No one knows where they're coming from. He comes home the next day, more emails have been sent, right? And no one knows where they're coming from. And George is just telling us, like, it's just, like, the police have come in and they asked George as a specialist to figure out where they're coming from. He can't find out where they're coming from. The cops don't think they'll ever figure it out. It's the weirdest thing, right? So like for like a month or so, we're hearing this. And then like out of nowhere, the school decides, despite all of the help that George has been giving this school, to just like fire him. They like replace him with sort of like a tech squad sort of thing, right? Like some contractor off-site, and so now George doesn't have a job. Him and my mom, they're about a year or so into being married, and it's a lot of me and George time. I'm the summers, he and I are hanging out a lot. I don't have that many friends, probably because I'm hanging out with my stepdad. And by the time I'm like 15, George is actually going through some health issues. Things are getting a lot harder for us, right? One time, I think that same summer when I was 15, we go and stay in one of Philadelphia's finest hotels, the Embassy Suites. And we wake up one morning and George's big conversion van is in the middle of the street. Like whatever valet he had left it with put it out there, right? Like for no reason at all, just to like mess with him, right? I guess they didn't like him, they didn't like his look. And so thankfully, they gave us a free night. We complained. It was very confusing for all of us. But like, it's a confusing time. George is going through some health things too. So in the summers, George and I will spend a lot of time, like, we live in like a really rural part of New Jersey, so he needs to go see some doctors at like medical parks, and we'll drive like an hour to these parks. And on the way, George was a huge Mets fan. I was not, but like, you know, sort of like a sympathetic pregnancy, you just sort of become a Mets fan, right? Like, I'm in the car listening to these games with him all the time. We get to the medical park. He goes inside. I don't want to go inside, so I sit in the van, and obviously I watch Austin Powers on the little TV that he had in his van, and then he comes back out, and we drive home. We listen to more Mets games, and I become, like, you know, a big fan. And this is how I spend like my years like 15 to 17. George sort of isn't getting any better. The doctors don't really know what's going on with him. He's continuing to try to get more and more tests. It's unclear what exactly is going on. And then when I turn 17, not really sure why, but my mom just like sort of comes to me and she's like, I'm getting a divorce from George, right? And doesn't give me much of a reason why, just kind of says like it's not working out. I'm not really sure what's going on, but I know that like at that point, like there have been years and years of me like sort of spending time with him. He's someone who is like part of my life now, right? Like something he would say all the time is like, if we were like in a fight, me and him, he would be like, your mom loves you because she has to love you. Your dad loves you because he has to love you. Like, I love you because I've chosen to, right? And I would be like, oh, like, that's reassuring. I'm glad my parents are stuck with me. And so it's like this person who has like sort of put himself into my life, right? And now he's suddenly being taken out of my life, which was like shocking, right? Like my mom's second husband, they split up when I was 5. I was sort of too young. That marriage was really short. My dad, I still saw him all the time. So this is the first person, like the first sort of like real divorce happening. And I don't really say anything about what I'm feeling because I'm a teenager. And I just sort of accept it, move on. I go off to college. And at college is when I start to write. I'm a novelist. My book is available for sale. And I start writing. I'm in like a creative writing class, and I write a memoir piece. And I write about George. And I not only write about George, I write about sort of a lot of anger that I was feeling, right? This person who was such a huge part of my life, to me, in my mind, just got sort of like shoved aside, right? My mom like was ruthless and pretty cruel in my mind, right? This person who could no longer be as like smart and entertaining and funny. Like he started to get sick and she just sort of pushed him aside. She's like, I'm done with this person. And I wrote an essay about that, right? Really like being critical of like both like sort of acknowledging the ways my complicated relationship with George and also acknowledging the ways that I thought that my mom was fairly cruel, right? And then I go home and I print this essay out and I just leave it around my house because I want to get caught. Well, and my mom reads the essay and she comes up to me and she's like, Isle, there's something I need to tell you about George. And she brings me to the family computer and she sort of punches into Google like George, the name of the high school, and the name of a newspaper. And what comes up is an article about how he had been sending messages to the superintendent demeaning the vice principal in an effort to get her fired. For no reason whatsoever, it seemed, other than the fact that maybe she said something mean to him once, and he went on a huge campaign. And at that point, my entire life is sort of like, everything I thought I knew about George is just fractured, right? Like, Duke, did it happen? The armadillo, like, did it happen? The CIA, was he even in the CIA, right? And I am forced to realize that this first essay of mine, this first like piece of writing that I was doing was just wrong about everything. I didn't know any of this story. And I have to confront this person who was such an integral part of my life was actually just kind of a pathological liar. And the first thing I thought about after that was not all of the lies. It was actually the last time that I talked to George, which was the day that he left. He packed everything into his van and he drove to the new place where he was going to be living. And there was a Mets game on TV. I turned on the TV. The Mets are playing the Yankees. Always a huge week of contention for us when that would happen. It would be very exciting, hoping that the Mets would win. The Mets were terrible, so they never did. But I turn on the TV, and it's like second inning, and the Mets are up like 10-0. And I call George, because he's outside of the range of the radio. And I'm like, George, like the Mets are winning 10-0. Like, this is amazing, right? And he's just like, yeah, okay, thanks. And hangs up the phone. And I'm devastated, right? Like this person who ostensibly loved me because he chose to love me just hangs up the phone. And I set the phone down, I walk away, I leave the TV on. I come back an hour later and the score is like 10-4. Like half hour later, it's like 10-7. I check in a little bit later, it's like 10-9. And then I look at the box score later, and the Mets lost. Thank you.
I know. All right, one more time. Let's hear it for McElroy. All right, so in a few minutes, there's going to be intermission. But for those of you who have been to Seriously Entertaining before, you know what is coming next, right? Come on, shout it out. Let me hear it. What is it? It is... Yes, tip of my tongue. That is correct. And what is, you may ask, tip of my tongue? So, tip of my tongue is when all of you, as Lucas says, all of you get to show just how brilliant you are and how you do not need to cheat and go onto your phones and use Google. No. Because what happens is that you are read to three excerpts, and then you will identify who wrote them and the title of the work. And the winner wins a tote bag full of signed books by the authors of tonight. Beyond your dreams, I know, woohoo! So, yes, and there it is. Wait, it will come back. All right, so tonight's quizmaster is fantastic, very special, woman after my own heart, Jennifer Baker, who is a publishing professional for 25 years, creator and host of the Minorities in Publishing podcast, editor of the short story anthology, Everyday People, The Color of Life, and author of the YA novel, Forgive Me Not. And this is key, because earlier this year, Jennifer participated in our student matinee that I was talking about in our Speak Together programs at Talent Unlimited High School. And before we bring on Jennifer to read from the quotes of Tip of My Tongue, we're going to show you a short video which illustrates her at work and the impact of this program. Take it away.
Having actual people who aren't the teachers talking to the students about their work just suddenly makes it seem like your desires and your dreams are possible. Representation is everything. And if you're not able to see a working, functioning, creative person in society, it can be hard to imagine what that might look like.
Growing up, we would hear, it's almost like a myth, the stories about authors or painters or dancers, but it's not oftentimes you get those people in the classroom or in the school, and then you get to talk with them in an intimate setting. So I think that's really important.
I find that working with young people opens up a door back into that pure, unadulterated joy at making something that's your own. I was just blown away by the students' questions when we met, and it was so inspiring getting to hear them talk about their favorite books and the work that's inspiring to them.
Through what House of SpeakEasy is doing, you get to see the possibilities again of what's out there and just learn about people as people and recognize how that feeds into artistry. They were just excited, I think, to be in a room together, to be able to just engage in a different way, to talk to someone who just was like, well, tell me about you. Tell me about yourself. Because I wanted to hear more from them.
What I like is how they use their personal experience in it and they were like not afraid to share it.
I really liked how everyone was very unique. The stories are able to inspire me with my lines and giving meaning to my lines.
I think that the stories from today will inspire me as an actor to be very vulnerable in my work and to use my own experiences in my acting.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm going to be like a school teacher. How are you? Wonderful. Wonderful. I love the energy in here and hope everyone's safe and your loved ones are safe as well. I didn't get to see the video. Was it good? Yeah. Wonderful. That means you're donating to the House of SpeakEasy. Done. Done and done. So I am here as the quiz master, which apparently is one of the easier jobs of the show. It's like Vanna White, but literary. So I'm going to read 3 quotes. You write them down, you get some free books, and then intermission time, hydrate. I'm an Aquarius, the water bearer. I encourage that. And then we come back for the rest of this fantastic, fantastic show. So quote number 1. If you're paying attention, I can't see you. The lights are really bright, as Al said. Jean Valjean recoiled with a cry of horror. The fact is, a strange phenomenon only conceivable in the situation in which he found himself, that in robbing the boy, he had committed an act of which he was no longer capable. In any event, this last misdeed had a decisive effect upon him. It piercingly dispelled the chaos in his mind, separating light from darkness and working under his spirit like a chemical reagent introduced into a turgid solution, which clarifies one element and precipitates another. Do you need a moment? Do you need a moment? I'll give you a few seconds. It's a lot of chatter. It's like, I love it. All right. All right. If you guessed La Cage aux Folles, you're right. All right. Quote number 2. Yesterday, a child came out to wander, caught a dragonfly inside a jar, fearful when the sky was full of thunder, and tearful at the falling of a star. And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time. We can't return. We can only look behind from where we came and go round and round and round in the circle game. Ooh, ooh. Do you know? Do you know? I can read the second one again, if you don't mind me doing that. I'm going to reread the second one. Yesterday, a child came out to wander, caught a dragonfly inside a jar, fearful when the sky was full of thunder, and tearful at the falling of a star. And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time. We can't return. We can only look behind from where we came and go round and round and round in the circle game. And we have a third one. Y'all are serious about these quotes. They're like, I feel there's some quorums happening. It's wonderful. All right, quote number 3, and I can repeat it if you'd like me to do that as well. We got time. I think we have time. I don't know. I might be lying. You may write down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. He's like, yep, got it, nailed it. Should I repeat that one? But I feel like some folks got that one. We're good? Great.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I know. Woo. All right. All right. A few more minutes of intermission. Write down your answers on the card with your email address. And good luck, everyone. Woo!
Ladies and gentlemen, hi everyone. We're coming back now. Can I draw your attention back up to the stage? I love that everyone's having fun out there. How did everyone do on the quiz? Mixed, too hard, too easy? No one used Google, I hope, right? Okay, we keep an eye on all of you. We're coming on to the second half of our show. We've got two more amazing speakers for you. And as always, I always describe Speakeasy as a literary mixtape. So you never quite know what you're going to get from an evening like this. So get ready for the next two. Our next speaker is Nick McDonnell. Nick is a reporter and novelist. He's written for the Harper's, London Review of Books, The New Yorker, Time Magazine, and he's written a number of novels, most famously at the tender age of about 18, 12, The Third Brother, An Expensive Education, The Council of Animals, and then he's done a lot of really important reportage from Iraq, from Afghanistan. He's covered the reindeer migrations in the Arctic Circle. And tonight he's here to talk about his new book, Quiet Street, which has just come out, which you can buy along with all of the other books by our amazing authors tonight. At the entrance as you leave, all the books will be signed after the show. And Nick's up here to talk about that. Dave Eggers wrote about one of his previous books, The Bodies in Person, that the book will never leave your conscience and never should. Please welcome Nick McDonnell to the stage.
It is bright. I was right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Lucas, for that kind introduction. I'm going to tell you a story tonight that came out of some reporting I did for a book on civilian casualties that he mentioned between 2013 and 2017. On September 15th, 2014, in Iraq, in Tikrit, a city north of Baghdad, in a neighborhood called Qadisiyah 2, Nazan Mohammed and his wife, Sundus, were finishing lunch in their living room, and their kids had just gotten up to play, when an enormous explosion blew in the windows of their house. Nazan, a 30-year-old accountant at the Tikrit College of Nursing, was stunned and thrown to the ground. When he regained his senses, the dust was so thick he couldn't see anything, and the first thing he heard were Sundus's screams. He looked through the dust for Sundus, and he found her, and he found his 3 youngest children. But he couldn't find his oldest child, Sarah. She was 6 years old. Since Sarah had been little, a toddler, she'd had health problems. She'd suffered difficulty breathing and had fever and lethargy, bouts of it. And Nazan had taken her to doctors all over the country, but nobody had been able to provide an accurate diagnosis or treatment. And so in early 2014, Nazan divided his house in 2, and he sold half of it so that he could afford to take his daughter Sarah to a hospital in Delhi and a specialist. And the trip paid off. The Indian doctors diagnosed a hole in one of Sarah's heart valves, and they performed surgery, and immediately she started to get better. But the doctors told Nazan that she had to be treated with care, not be made too excited, no surprises, and given that, the prognosis was good. There would have to be another operation. But this was good news, and father and daughter returned to Tikrit optimistically in spring of 2014. But in late spring, early summer, ISIS arrived in Tikrit, and it paralyzed the city. Nazan saw fighters coming and going from the big house across the street from his own house, and soon he noticed guards posted there. A grim summer began. 2 of Sundus's brothers, who were police officers in Tikrit, were killed by ISIS fighters. ISIS didn't shut down the College of Nursing, where Nazan worked as an accountant, but he was too frightened to go to work. He went out rarely, just for food or water. He didn't know what to do. There were shortages of everything, prices spiked, and he was worried every day about Sarah's health. He and Sundus talked about fleeing every day, but Nazan was worried that ISIS would stop them. They weren't allowed to leave, and they'd catch him, and who knows what they'd do then. And anyway, he didn't know where to go. He didn't have much money to rent a place in some other city, and the people he knew who had gone were calling and saying it's not good here. The refugees are not having a good time. So he and Sundus decided to stay put. In early September, at the end of the summer, there was this little bit of good news. A colleague of Nazan's had gone back to work at the college and called him and said, "It's okay, you can make it." So Nazan went. He went one day, he did his job, he went back home, no incident, no problem, and he thought, okay, maybe life can start to return to normal, or if not normal, would just be improved a little bit. And it was 2 days after this first day back that, with his ears ringing, he clawed his way through the smoke and went out to the street and found his daughter on the ground. And across the street, the big house was rubble, but Sarah was on the ground. And he knelt. She didn't seem to be bleeding, but she was barely breathing, and she was unconscious. So he picked her up. He yelled for Sundus and the kids to get in the car. He loaded Sarah in the car. He grabbed his IDs, and he drove as fast as he could to go get to the hospital and save his daughter. A few days after that, a 25-year-old woman stood in front of Nazan's house and snapped a picture of the rubble across the street. She felt a certain satisfaction. As far as she was concerned, she was personally responsible for the American airstrike that had destroyed this ISIS headquarters. No one, she believed, suspected her of anything. The mission was accomplished. ISIS fighters killed, stinking in the rubble, and she was safe. This woman, Sabrine, grew up in Al-Alam, a village on the outskirts of Tikrit, a place that's famous actually as the birthplace of Saddam Hussein. When Sabrine was 14, in 2003, American troops arrived, and soon after that, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which had never existed before in Tikrit, emerged to fight the Americans. ISIS was an evolution and an outgrowth of that earlier group. At 14, Sabrine was finished with school and stayed home with her mother and sisters to take care of their small household. Income from the family came from the government. Her father was a retired police officer, and her world consisted of house, market, mosque, and occasional visits to family members, and the assumption of marriage, which came soon. When Sabrine was 20, in 2009, a cousin who'd seen her at a wedding approached her aunts to negotiate a marriage, and the second time Sabrine met this cousin, they got married. 9 months later, she gave birth to a son. But before her first anniversary, Sabrine decided she wanted a divorce. She claimed that her husband was disrespecting and beating her. The process took a year, but Sabrine got her divorce, and she moved in with a married sister who lived in Qadisiyah 2, Nazan and Sundus's neighborhood. Not knowing what to do next, Sabrine kept doing what she'd been doing all year. She went to court. She liked the court. She enjoyed the legal proceedings. It was better than being at home. She liked the drama. She had friends there. And actually, she went so much in that year, the following year, that people actually mistook her for a lawyer sometimes and asked her for legal advice. And she would have to tell them, sorry, no, I'm not a lawyer. But she really liked that idea. She thought, I'd love to be a lawyer. But she hadn't gone past secondary school, and she didn't have any money. What little money she did have came from another government office, the Office for the Assistance for Widows and Divorced Women in Tikrit. And this was another place that she took to hanging out, kind of like the courthouse. She would chat with young widows and divorcees while they waited for paperwork or to collect their payments. And it was one morning in that office that Sabrine was approached by a woman in the black uniform of the Iraqi Special Forces. That woman's name was Wahida, and she traveled with several armed men who really obeyed her orders, hop to when she said something, and Sabrine was very impressed by this. Wahida had been married to an Iraqi Brigadier Army general, but he'd been killed by Al-Qaeda, and she was there to collect her payment, her widow's payment. But she was also there to recruit spies. She often recruited spies at the office and at divorce court, which she believed was a good place to look for spies and assassins. She told Sabrine that she was at war with Al-Qaeda, and as Sabrine knew, Al-Qaeda operated throughout the country, even in the government, even in the courts. Did Sabrine want to help root them out? Sabrine did, especially when Wahida told her she'd be paid. Over the next couple of years, the women grew close. Wahida told Sabrine to keep going to the courthouse and report on anything suspicious, anyone who might oppose the government. This was Sabrine's job when, in June of 2014, Islamic State fighters drove their trucks into Tikrit. Now, the city had been relatively calm since the Americans had withdrawn a few years before, but Sabrine was not surprised that some of her neighbors and relatives were indifferent or sympathetic even to the ISIS fighters who took over Tikrit in that early summer day. The local population felt largely disenfranchised and threatened by the United States-backed government in Baghdad. The Iraqi army, many Tikritis thought, was as dangerous as any local insurgent group like ISIS. But ISIS quickly proved its brutality. The Iraqi army fled as ISIS fighters occupied the local military base, blew up the courthouse, and hung police officers in the street. On their second day, ISIS executed more than 1,700 Iraqi Air Force cadets in a nearby military camp and bulldozed the bodies into a mass grave. Sabrine herself saw 8 people beheaded in the traffic circle that summer. But the militants couldn't be everywhere at once. And, in careful defiance, Sabrine kept her phone, which was illegal. She hid it in her underwear, and sometimes, if she was nervous enough about being searched, she hid it in her vagina. She resaved Wahida's number under a single word, lawyer, and began calling information in, mental lists she'd make on the way to the market. She'd provide checkpoint locations, or the number of men, or the kind of weapons they were carrying, or their names. And a few weeks into the occupation, she gathered a piece of intelligence about a building in the neighborhood, Qadisiyah 2. The big house across the street from Nazan's house, she saw, had become a base for ISIS fighters. Now, Sabrine had known Nazan since they were children, and she wanted to warn him about what she was about to do. But she was afraid that if she told him, word would get out that she was a spy, and ISIS would kill her. So she didn't warn anyone. She relayed the location of the house up to Wahida and a superior officer in the Iraqi Special Forces, who in turn passed the information on to a CIA officer, codenamed Marius. And the Americans launched an airstrike. The Iraqi army, with overwhelming American air support, liberated Tikrit from ISIS some 4 months later. In the coming years, the Allies retook most of the country, but they did not achieve their stated goal, their other stated goal, of eradicating ISIS. They killed a great number of them, of course. Since the war in Iraq began in 2003, the best conservative estimate for a number of opposition fighters, like ISIS fighters, killed, that number is estimated to be 36,806 people killed. Still, the group, much diminished, persists underground. And in the course of that killing, civilians were killed too. The best conservative estimate for that number, the number of civilians killed in the course of killing those opposition fighters, since 2003, is 186,694. which is roughly 150,000 more people. But that's the conservative estimate, and limited only to those killed directly, immediately, by the violence. Sarah was not one of these. The day of the airstrike, Nazan drove directly to a hospital where doctors examined her. She regained consciousness, but she was partially paralyzed, and she lingered for 3 months after that before she died. Officially, she died of a heart attack, so she was not counted by the Iraqi Ministry of Health or the United States or anybody else as a civilian casualty killed in an airstrike.
Thank you, Nick, for that powerful story. Our final speaker tonight on the theme of what goes around is a New York Times best-selling author and a former contributor to The New Yorker, former editor at The New Yorker, still contributing, he reminded me. His novels and short story collections include The Slippage and Superbad, and in the last couple years he's been writing extensively, co-writing with numerous notable musicians and actors. He's done Questlove's books. He's written with George Clinton and Brian Wilson's memoirs. And his newest book, just out, he wrote the memoir of Sly Stone. Hard to think of a cooler quartet of people to work with than that. Please welcome Ben Greenman to the stage.
I have a little bit of housekeeping before I do my story. So when I was coming here tonight, I got an email from an old friend who I've known forever saying that he was going to be here. I was thrilled that he was going to be here. This is somebody who I really like and admire and I've known forever. And I came here and he was here, and I went to talk to him for a bit. And then as I was leaving and saying goodbye to him and his lovely wife, I reached and I knocked over a glass of red wine onto his lap and his clothing. So I was thinking after I did that, how do you make up for something like that? So then I thought I should give him a public apology. So what I'm going to do is just take a second and email him. It's a public apology and a pun because of where we are. So I'm going to give him a public apology. Exactly. Hilarious. So let me just send him an apology right now. Let's see. I've prepared it in advance. It's in draft. And I'm going to send it right now. Is that him calling? Okay. That's the apology. And then the only thing better than a public apology is a public spectacle. All right. So the name of this story is Celebrity X, or There is a Chicken in This Story. It has 4 parts. Part 1. This story starts on a day I saw a guy trip and fall. I've seen people trip and fall more than once, but this time was special. This guy was hurrying across the street in Midtown, and he got his feet tangled up, and he went face forward, and then somehow executed a perfect somersault and came right back, sprang right back up onto his feet. I remember thinking at the time that it would be hard to forget. It turns out I was right, because this was 20 years ago, something like that. I know the time roughly because it's around the time that a friend of mine made this joke where he said that Chuck Berry's song Memphis was directed by M. Night Shyamalan because it has a twist ending. It's not a good joke, it's a thinker, but I remember thinking about it that day and thinking, it's kind of something, but also kind of, I don't know, mannered, whatever. So thinking about that joke, saw this guy went over. That day, I was on my way to a meeting with a publisher. I had met this guy a couple years before, and he was short and intense and very skinny when I first met him. And then he put on some weight, and then he put on the rest of it. And carrying all of this extra weight made him grumpy, and that day that I was going to meet with him, I made him grumpier. We had been talking about a biography of a popular funk star at the time. This artist was among the most brilliant creators of any popular art form of his or any other generation, somebody who I revered. And I had met this publisher at a party and said, I'm thinking of writing a biography of this musician. And he brightened to this idea, and we were getting along famously. It wasn't agented, it was just, I don't know, we were just talking about it. But I had come to his office that day with bad news. My research into this person's life, this star's life, had been going very well, which doesn't seem like bad news maybe on the face of it. But it had been going so well that I couldn't go on with the project. What had happened is that as I started to research, and this was back in the Sixth Sense days, so it was microfiche and libraries and that kind of thing, and I found out things that I did not like, or things that upset me about this particular celebrity. They weren't about his copious drug use. I was okay with that. They weren't about his prickly personality. I was okay with that. There were other things that started to unnerve me. And I had gone to his office that day to tell him that I didn't think that I was a biographer. I didn't really want to do it. My goal was to uplift this person and his life rather than drag him down into muck, self-made muck, admittedly, but I didn't want to drag him into the muck. So he was sitting down and he said, why are you stopping? And I said, well, I found out some unsavory things. And he said, why are you stopping? And I said, I found out some unsavory things. And he looked at me again. He said, why are you stopping? And at that point, the conversation had deteriorated into a loop. And he got up. He realized we were going nowhere. So I went somewhere. I went out of his office. And that was that. Part 2. I felt bad after that meeting. I felt like I failed to do something, largely because I had. And up to that point, I had been publishing mostly fiction. So as I sat with that failure over the months and the year or so, I thought, oh, I have a good idea. So the good idea I had was to recast that failed biography as a novel. And I used this character's life, this person's life, as the foundation for a character. I built in composites, I pulled in other figures, I worked around it, I fictionalized a lot of place and time and plot, but it was in spirit the biography that had never happened. I finalized it, I found a publisher, it came out, it made the rounds. Part 3. One day, about 4.5 months after that, I got a call from a number that looked like the number of the publisher whose office I had visited that day that I abandoned the biography. But it wasn't. It started the same, ended differently. I picked up the call, and it turned out it was a different editor in the same company. And he had read the novel, and something about it put him in mind of what he said was a, quote, unrelated, related project. And it turned out, that was intriguing enough for me to continue the call, and it turned out that he wanted me to collaborate with a famous person on this famous person's memoir. Different person. The idea did not appeal to me immediately. I had been writing mostly fiction, but when I thought about it, I realized quickly that there were other considerations. My wife and I had 2 children, and they had learned to walk and to read, and at some point they went off to little kids' school. And there was at least some chance, I thought, that they would one day attend an institution of higher learning. And that meant rubbing fingers together. Oh, actually, wait, I'm not supposed to say it. I'm supposed to just do it. Wait, that meant... So you know the movie The Gold Rush by Charlie Chaplin. He plays this Alaskan prospector, and he is braving a brutal winter, and he's in a cabin with this other prospector named Big Jim. And Big Jim is starving, and at some point he looks over and sees Chaplin, who's playing the little tramp character, and he hallucinates him as a giant chicken, a potential meal for him. That's a version of what happens when you have children who are approaching college age. Though there's a key difference. You do not see each child as a giant chicken that you might eat. You see each child as a giant chicken that might eat you. And this is a disconcerting feeling that's made more disconcerting if you check your bank account and you find that you do not have enough chicken feed. So for this reason, fiction receded and other kinds of writing came to the fore, including this unrelated, related collaboration that I had been pitched by this editor who was not the first editor. I did that, and I I liked it. And after that, I did other projects as well. I worked with other singers, I worked with actors, I worked with comedians. And what I found, which was interesting, is that it was liberating in a sense. It was therapeutic for them to tell their life stories, and therapeutic for me because I got to listen to them. And all of this kind of talking and thinking flew away. I could hear about the world that they had inhabited, and in many cases, the worlds that they had changed, without spending too much time reflecting on my own world, which was a place that felt, if not always malignant, rarely benign. So I continued to do these kinds of projects, and the career shifted. Part 4. Years passed as these other collaborations happened, and then at one point, one of the collaborations I was asked to do was with a guy who had been a close friend of that initial celebrity, Celebrity X, the one who I had pitched the biography on years before. We talked about this celebrity during the course of working on this other book frequently. He had been a close friend, a collaborator, an inspiration to the person I was working with. And I was timid at first, then more timid, then less timid, then more timid again, but eventually I worked up the courage to ask him if he might make an introduction. And he was immediately enthusiastic. I'll hook you up, he said, and then he did. So I met this celebrity, Celebrity X, and the people around him. And I discovered that he did want to write his life story. He really wanted to write a memoir. There was a wrinkle. At the time, he was living a lifestyle that was not really conducive to working with me or anyone. He had a drug problem, which meant that most of his days were spent kind of in short-term plays for cash. I tried to start to create a work schedule, and he or his people would say, yeah, you can have a conversation for $1,000. And then I would explain, no, that's not really how it works. And then they would say, well, then it's not going to work. And we went on like that for years. It was an interesting and painful dance that I was losing. If you can, I guess you can lose a dance. I did. So then one day, a number of years passed, and one day my phone rang, and a new person was on the phone. And she introduced herself as the manager of Celebrity X, close friend of his and manager. And she delivered an important piece of news, which was that the wrinkle had been ironed out. He was, after years and years of addiction, on his way to getting clean. And that meant for him a new attitude and a new approach to things. And she also was there at his side. And she assured me that he understood what the process would require and that she would help manage his schedule. And the mere fact that she was using words like process and schedule, that changed everything. And I was all in. And I remember going to my wife and saying, I think it's really going to happen. And she had heard me say that way too many times for our marriage to have survived that. But this time turns out I was right. And so I helped him write his life story. And it was a transformative experience in a lot of ways. He was a brilliant person. He is a brilliant person. Also a very complicated person. Conversations with him were rewarding. He didn't shy away from all of the dark things that I had shied away from earlier because, I don't know, he's braver and it was his life. Over the course of working on this project, he got to sort of tell and write his life story, and it also, in one interesting way, rewrote my own life story. So remember at the beginning of this, right after I threw the wine on myself, I was talking about a guy who tripped in the street? What happened to me over the course of writing this book was like that, only slower. I felt like I had tumbled, long turn, back up. And then also remember when I had that friend who had that joke that M. Night Shyamalan directed Chuck Berry's Memphis because it had a twist ending? Well, that happened to me too, as it turned out, only less elegantly. The way that this story ended was that I had failed to write this biography. I had retooled it as a novel. I had sent it out into the world. I had watched it bring me into contact with a new kind of work and new people, and then eventually watched with kind of a disbelief almost as it brought me into contact with the subject of that original abandoned biography, who, as it turned out in the intervening years, had developed a need for the new kind of work that I was now doing. So when I was first invited to tonight's event, I said, yeah, I'll do it. And then I said, what's the theme? And they said, oh, it's what goes around. And it was such a perfect fit that I assumed that it was a prank. So, thank you, pranksters.
Okay, one more time for Ben Greenman. Woo!
That's our show tonight. Huge round of applause for all of our amazing speakers. Woo! They're all going to be signing books as you exit. But before you exit, the moment you've been waiting for, the quiz, the answers to the quiz. Do you want to know the winners first or the answers first? Answers. Okay. First passage was by Victor Hugo, Les Miserables.
You're going to sing?
I'm not going to sing. No, you don't want me to sing. I'd be subject you. That would be a real what goes around kind of thing. Next up is by Joni Mitchell, The Circle Game. Always hard when no one's singing the song. I know, it's not fair, but, you know. And then the final passage is Still I Rise by Maya Angelou.
Yeah, of course.
So, we have about seven people who got it right, but only one person can go home tonight with the signed book bag. So Amanda's going to pick the winner. I'm sorry, this is where it gets into just, life is just about chance sometimes.
I know, it really is, sorry. There we go.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. All right, Mary Beth Loads, you won. Woo!
And we want to leave you with 2 dates before you leave. The first is November 7th. We're going to be back here on this stage with another amazing lineup of writers and thinkers and speakers. Tia Miles, Ruha Benjamin, Dennis Yi Tenon, and Ashley Shu. It's going to be an amazing show in partnership with Norton. You know, the Norton Anthology of Literature, that famous publisher. We're going to do something with them on that night. So come join us again. And then April 16th, we've just announced, is the night of our annual gala. So keep that in mind. Check it out. Please join us. It'll be a very exciting and thrilling night. Big round of applause. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to our amazing speaker. We hope to see you again soon. And get your book signed as you go out. Thank you. Okay.